So Muhammad Hijab very confidently at Speaker's Corner is telling a man that he is wrong about slavery in Islam. He's trying to make it look like Islam is actually good for slaves. He's trying to paint a false image about just how bad it really is for slaves under Islam. Let's get into it.
Thank you for joining the Sunday sparring sessions with subpar opponents like this man here. Hasn't used enough evidences from the Quran or Sunnah. In fact, he hasn't used any evidence at all. So the Quran states something which refutes almost everything he states, which is in chapter 90 of the Quran. What would make you know what the good way is? Freeing slaves is the good way. So the idea that the manumission of slave was that which is not mentioned in the Quran, but in fact the opposite of is mentioned, is something directly refuted in the Quranic discourse. Now this verse is not an abrogated verse, but not only this, we find in the Quran in chapter 9, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the categories of zakat, which is, as you know, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. There are 5 pillars of Islam. I can teach you the basics in some other time. One of them is zakat, the charity. One of the categories of charity is freeing slaves.
This is like breadcrumbs. This is like giving someone breadcrumbs, stealing a whole loaf of bread from them, and then saying, here's a few crumbs for you. Here you go. Take these couple of crumbs. The whole system of allowing slavery in the first place is a bigger problem than the fact that, we have to free slaves. In fact, if you think about it, the fact that the Quran talks about freeing slaves and people are promoting this as a good thing, which it is, shows you that slavery is wrong. So you see, we have a problem. The problem we have is that Islam has slavery in it, and not just the Hadith, but the Quran as well. It's part and parcel of Islamic morality. So what do we do with this? How do we get rid of the fact? Well, modern Muslims today would love to get rid of slavery from Islam because it's one of the most troubling things. And here's the problem with Islamic morality. You get the good and bad together. It's all packaged up together in one package. So if you want to get rid of the slippery slope of secular morality and you don't like the fact that certain things are allowed nowadays or accepted, such as LGBT rights, then you have to go back to religious morality, which also allows slavery. So what do we do with that? Well, Muslims would like to kind of hide from that and to say that, the Quran allows you to free slaves, encourages you to free slaves. You can use zakat to free slaves. But let's get into the details. Let me show you just how bad it really gets. So let's start here. We have this hadith in the Muwatta of Malik. Hadith are collections of sayings about the Prophet or about the companions sometimes, and things that happen that have been preserved in order for Sunni Muslims, these are the Sunni Hadith books, to understand the history of Islam and how to live your life as a Muslim, right? The most important ones are where you have the Messenger of Allah, meaning Prophet Muhammad, speaking, right? So in this situation, we had this woman who had a miscarriage, and in order to make her feel better, I guess, Prophet Muhammad said, give her a slave or a slave girl of fair complexion and excellence. Meaning, he's gifting her a slave as a feel better. So imagine this, in today's world, something bad happens to someone, someone dies or they have a miscarriage. Let me give you a slave. Yeah, that's a great gift. Well, why not just send her some cookies or something? You know what I mean? But instead, let's take this human and let's give this human being as a gift to someone else. Like, really? Wow. Like, that's just... Okay, let's just keep going. There's more. It gets better. So here we have a story of, again, Prophet Muhammad, where a man came to him and wanted to stay with him, and then it turns out he was a slave. So Muhammad said, sell him to me, right? So then he bought him for 2 black slaves, and he did not accept until he had said, is he a slave? We have many examples of Prophet Muhammad buying and selling slaves. Okay, this is not just the only one. And in this case, he's trading 2 slaves for 1 slave. Like, what is this, 2 for 1 sale? Like, come on. Let's continue. Now, we always hear about how, slaves are supposed to be treated well, and there are hadith that say, treat them well. But at the same time, there's also hadith like this that talk about slaves are not allowed to run away. So it's again a double-edged sword, right? A slave of Jarir's ran away, and he caught him and struck his neck. So if you're a slave and you run away, this hadith is actually justifying that you could be killed for running away. And the funny thing is, it says a slave who runs away to the land of shirk. Well, why do you think he's running away? Muslims are enslaving him, right? Like, obviously, he'd want to run away. I mean, to the land of shirk. Maybe to treat him better, right? And not have him as a slave, right? Because slavery is allowed in Islam, right? Now we're going to get into even worse stuff. The Quran says in chapter 23, Surah Mu'minun, verse 6, that let me show you some more context, that this is praising people who guard their chastity, who don't have illicit premarital sex, except from those whom the right hand possess, meaning slaves. Meaning in Islam, in the Quran itself, you are allowed to have sex with your slaves. Sometimes Muslims will try to make this sound less bad than it really is. They'll say, well, there's consent. But here's the problem. Where is the rules of consent? With all of the rules about don't hit it in the face, or don't treat them badly and feed them or whatever, there's no mention of consent. There's no mention of like having to marry a slave before they become your part, like before you have sex with them, basically, right? There's no mention of that anywhere. It literally gives you justification, and you have an unfair power dynamic, where you have a slave who's owned by another human being, and that slave is totally dependent on this person for a livelihood, yet you're allowed to have sex with them. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than this. This is one of the worst things. Even Jonathan Brown in his book on slavery admitted this is one of the worst problems for Muslims, right? Not to mention the fact that the most perfect man was buying and selling slaves, right? He owned slaves. He was gifting slaves to people as gifts. Now, check this out. Imagine you have a slave woman and you make her pregnant. Now, here's where the apologetics come in. You'll hear some Muslims tell you that, well, now she gets a special status. She's an walad, meaning mother of your children. She's your baby mama, basically. I mean, it's not even that, because she's your slave. So it's not like she was in this relationship it's not like she chose to be in this relationship. She never chose this relationship. You basically impregnated her, right? And guess what? You will be shocked to hear just how bad it gets. So first of all, we didn't talk about this, but under Islam, when you have slaves, you can buy and sell different parts of the family. You can sell the kids, you can buy a man that's married to another woman. If he's a slave, it doesn't matter. They don't get to stay together, right? Families are torn apart, slave families, right? Now, you would think that if you had a child with this slave, that would be your child, right? Let's see how the Muslims, the best generation according to the Quran, treated the walads, meaning the slaves that they impregnated, and the kids. It literally says right here, we used to sell the mothers of our children. Jabir ibn Abdullah was heard to say, we used to sell our slave women, okay, they sold and bought them like property, just like animals, and the mothers of our children, while the Prophet was still alive, and we didn't see anything wrong with that. So he's saying that, imagine this woman that you made a kid with, she's your slave, but you sell her, you're done with her, you had a kid with her, and you sell her, and potentially her kids too, and potentially her kids will go to one person, she'll go to another person. Imagine this person's your child. You're selling your own kids. Imagine this is how the Islamic worldview was and is. Today, Muslims are projecting what they think about modern society, liberal, enlightened societies onto the Quran, and they're taking the best parts, they're picking and choosing what they think makes the most sense. But the reality is really much, much worse than this. Just imagine this, right? I'm going to show you a little bit more. Now we have what the apologetics coming to. The apologists will tell you that when you have walads, meaning a woman that you impregnated. She's sort of like a wife. So what happens is her children are automatically freed when she dies, but that's not the case. Imam Malik in his collection talks about this, and he says that unless you explicitly made an agreement that her children would be freed when she dies, her children continue to be your slaves. How is that, right? Or you can sell it, or you can actually, it says right here that the master can change his will when he likes and rescind it when he likes, and being set free is not confirmed for her, right? She's in a position of a slave girl. So basically, unless you made an explicit agreement that her children will be freed, or she'll be dead, this is not automatic. So just imagine how bad this is. So now the final nail that I'm going to put in the coffin, is right here. Who ended slavery? If Islam is so positive about freeing slaves and this and that, then Muslims should have been the first ones to end slavery. Is that the case? No. Jonathan Brown, in his book, Slavery and Islam, said it was not until they encountered European abolitionism in the mid-19th century that they considered eliminating slavery as an institution. Since then, Muslim scholars and intellectuals have developed a range of arguments, some mirroring Christian abolitionists, for justifying ending a practice that God and His Prophet had allowed. So right there, the fruit of the tree is rotten. It shows you that this was used for more evil than good. Islam has been used for more evil than good. It hasn't been used for the good of humanity overall, which is why I consider myself an anti-theist. I believe that religion is worse for the world than good. Sure, it had its reasons. We had a need for it at some point. But when we look at it today, it's just dragging all these terrible things into the 21st century, which is why ISIS used this as a justification to own human beings. Thanks for watching. Thank you to my patrons for continuing to support me. I really do appreciate the help. If you'd like to join the team, click join now below on YouTube, or join the Patreon, where I sometimes release early videos. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, leave a thumbs up and leave a comment on what you think about slavery in Islam. Is it really as good as Muslims are trying to say it is? Is Muhammad Hijab right? Slavery, it's all about freeing the slaves. The Quran's all about freeing the slaves. You're totally wrong. Like, with this false bravado. No, Islam is actually a net loss for humanity. Thanks for watching. This is your friendly ex-Muslim, Abdullah Samir, signing out.